Much to talk about this morning with Loyola Law professor Jessica Levinson.
Yeah, we want to start out, Jessica, with yesterday's drama with the Senate Judiciary Committee and all your time covering the Supreme Court nominations. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No. So the most that you can liken it to, obviously, is the Anita Hill allegations against now Justice Clarence Thomas. But I have not seen this type of vitriol, this type of partisan wrangling, this type of surprise bartering at the very end. And frankly, what struck me the most is I have never seen someone come to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee for a place on the federal bench with that level of anger and with that level of partisan rage before.
So now we're seeing another investigation by the FBI. This one's supposed to only be a week, but what kind of evidence would they need to present in order for some of these Republican senators to vote against his confirmation?
Well, I think that's a question that assumes that either side can be swayed. And so I think most people, before the hearing even began on Thursday, had already made up their minds. So the FBI can do an investigation, but I have to say I have serious concerns as to whether or not, regardless of what's uncovered, it will actually sway anybody. So what the FBI will be looking at is looking at trying to find more testimony by people who might have been there, who might have information on Judge Kavanaugh that could talk about similar allegations, and whether or not there's any documentary evidence. Are there any pieces of paper, pictures, audio files, anything like that that could be helpful? But this is a crime that's alleged that's very old. It's difficult in any circumstance to get information. So I think those are who are hoping for a smoking gun, it's not set up to find that.
Right.
We want to talk a little bit more about Judge Kavanaugh's opening statements. Some people saw the attacks that he had on the Democrats, perhaps a looking glass into how he will rule. What's your opinion on this?
My opinion is if you take out the allegations of sexual assault, which you should not, but if you take those apart and you just look at his performance in front of the Senate, I found it deeply troubling that this is a man who wants to be on the highest court in the land, who wants to rule on issues which are going to be not just hot button issues, but are going to have serious consequences for political parties. And I think that in his rage towards one side of the aisle, we saw a predisposition that I wouldn't want from a Democrat and I wouldn't want from a Republican. The court is going to be dealing with issues of privacy rights, reproductive rights, voting rights, First Amendment rights. All of these have partisan effects and consequences. And that's what I took away as the most surprising aspect of this week.
And with all this going on, we can't forget that the president is still dealing with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who has said that he has not worn a wire in talking to the president. What do you think Rosenstein's future holds?
Well, I think that he is negotiating an exit. I think that he will no longer be acting attorney general in charge of the investigation over whether or not there was conspiracy between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. So the next person who steps in will be Noel Francisco, the current Solicitor General. And he will be who Robert Mueller, the special counsel, reports to. Noel Francisco, I think most people anticipate will perhaps try and narrow the scope of the investigation and will make President Trump happier and try and say, let's wrap this up. Of course, we know that's not the end of the story because there are other prosecutors, both federal and state, who could pick up the threads of this investigation.
All right, Professor Levinson, thank you so much for joining us this morning.